This is Duke University.
So thank you all for coming. I'm very pleased to welcome Jonathan Kellner, a senior associate at Skadden's office in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Jonathan is here with us as part of the JD-LLM Lives in International Law Speaker Series program. A 2003 graduate of Duke Law with a JD-LLM degree. Jonathan advises a broad range of international and U.S. companies in Brazil on capital markets, M&A, and in other investment vehicles, private equity issues. Prior to Skadden, Jonathan worked in New York and Sao Paulo offices of Sherman Sterling. And he has worked across the Americas and parts of Africa, I believe. Has broad expertise and advised a multitude of international companies. One of them, which you may even be familiar with, for example, he advised a Brazilian investor in a $450 million club deal to purchase Barbary Incorporated. If you don't know who they are, you will know. Anyway, so please give Jonathan a very warm welcome. And thank you for coming and speaking with students today.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, good. Do I need to stand here? Or
Wherever you want.
Okay, I didn't know for the video.
Did they mic you up?
They mic'd me.
Yes.
Okay, so it's going to be just, well, okay. Hi, everyone, nice to see you. Again, John Kellner. I'm a senior associate at Skadden ARPS in Sao Paulo. I appreciate you all coming out on a Friday and a rainy day, nonetheless. I remember, even though it was 2003, I remember what it's like to come out on a Friday, so I appreciate that to come and hear me. I'm here to speak to you about my experiences, and I'm essentially going to tell you my story and how I've gotten from my days at Duke and even before to here, because I'm hoping that through my story, it'll give you some ideas as you all are working on your career development, that you'll be able to see some things that I did and say, oh, that's a really good idea, I'll do that, or actually a terrible idea, I'm going to do quite the opposite. And I'm glad to serve as an example for that as well. My story is I'm from Baltimore. I have no language abilities in my family or anything. I barely speak English, I say sometimes. But I was studying at the University of Virginia in undergrad in the 90s. And in 1998, I ended up in Spain, in Seville, Spain, for a study abroad. It was my first time out of the United States. And it just so happens it was my first experience essentially doing much with the internet. And I always tell the story that I feel that 1998 for me was when globalization, the word, became part of our vernacular. It was when I first got my Yahoo account, for example. I started to do things on the internet, and I said to myself, wow, this globalization thing may be an opportunity for me. How can I take advantage of it? So having been in Spain for a semester, I had learned some Spanish. I wasn't happy with it, and so I decided after I graduated from UVA in 1999 that I would take a year off when I applied to Duke and other law schools. And I just got on a plane, and I went to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I landed in December of 1999, and I got an apartment. I signed up for Spanish courses, and in 6 months' time, I developed a pretty good proficiency slash fluency in Spanish, and I got into Duke's JD-LLM program, knew that I wanted to continue in this globalization road, and so I got into the JD-LLM program, immediately came back in May of 2000 and started here. So I did the Hong Kong program, my first summer after our first year. And before that, the international office had set me up with a Japanese law firm. It was an LLM, perhaps you've seen these programs. And I worked for the first half of the summer in Tokyo. It was my first time being in Asia. And I decided to use my lunch breaks as an opportunity to get to know the international law firms. In the early 2000s, everybody, it's the same thing now, everyone was saying they're the international law firm. And so I said, well, I'm going to test it myself, because when I get back in a few months to Duke, I'm going to be interviewing. And so I contacted every American and British law firm you can imagine that had an office in Tokyo. And I simply wrote an email. I said, I'm a first-year Duke student studying international law, and I would love just have 5 minutes of your time just to speak with you if I could come by. And it was a surprise to me because many were extremely gracious with their time. They gave me several hours. Many took me to lunch, so I got free meals with it. And I got a real good understanding of who were the international law firms out there. I then did the Hong Kong program, and I did the same thing. I contacted all of the firms that had Hong Kong offices. In many ways, I would say I met with your colleague blank in Tokyo, and he recommended that I come and see you. I probably exaggerated a bit with some of them. And I turned that into a job, essentially. I had hoped that this would happen, but I didn't know it would happen. On my last day in Hong Kong, everyone had already left. I stayed an extra day after finals. I called Sherman and Sterling. I said, I've tried for the last 5 weeks to get in with you all. I'm leaving now. Please just let me meet with the head of the office. And the head of recruiting in Hong Kong said, John, I'm really so sorry. I know you've tried so hard, but Ed, his name is Ed Turner, happens to be traveling today, and so I'm going to put you with an associate. Just come on by. I said, I'm meeting an associate. Great. What's that going to do for me? So I go and I meet a fourth-year associate. And we had a great meeting, and this guy goes and recommends me to New York. So I get on a plane, and when I land, New York sends me an email, New York, Sherman and Sterling, and says, we're going to count that as your on-campus interview. They spoke so highly of you in Hong Kong. Come immediately to New York. And so by the end of August, in those days, we actually recruited in September and October, not like you all do in August, I had my first job. And so that was obviously, I was far more relaxed than all my colleagues, let's say. So going in, I'm now in my second year, and I decided I wanted to study abroad. I wanted to have an overseas experience, and the international office was very gracious. They said, if you want to study in a Spanish-speaking country, we have no program, but we have spoken to a Mexican law school. It's called ITAM. Go ahead and contact them, and if they're interested, you can be the first exchange student. So I contacted them, and my second semester of my second year, I was our first exchange student in the ITAM program. Do we still have that?
It's not very active, no.
Okay, well then, some of you can bring it back.
Argentina, we have Chile, we have Spain.
Okay.
There are other options.
Well, good.
But,
So,
if you're interested, we can talk about it.
of course.
Yeah.
So I went to Mexico, and I decided once I started and I saw how Mexican law students do things. Essentially, they study in the mornings or the evenings because the other half of the day they're working in law firms. And I decided I wanted to have that experience. So I contacted all of the U.S. law firms that had offices, and I wound up becoming a legal assistant at White & Case. And I worked, I think, just 3 days because I didn't want to do the 5 day. I wanted to have some sort of nice experience of being in Mexico City. And I worked 3 afternoon evenings a week. I think it was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then I was a student Monday through Friday, generally in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings. And I came back and I started my summer associateship at Sherman & Sterling. So I had more experience. I now worked inside a law firm, had a wonderful experience at Sherman & Sterling, started my third year and decided I was going to go to Sherman & Sterling. In this time, this is now 2002, Argentina had its debt crisis. And I decided that I needed to hedge because I thought maybe Spanish-speaking Latin America was going to be in the doldrums for a few years as a result of the Argentine default. I better hedge. I knew nothing about Brazil. I knew not a word of Portuguese, but I decided to take, in my last semester of law school, 8 a.m., Monday through Friday, 101, Portuguese 101 at Duke, down the street. And because of my Spanish, it was very easy to learn the language. And I thought I learned it quite well. Graduated. Took the bar, started at Sherman & Sterling in the fall of 2003. And to my luck, Sherman announced that they were opening an office in Sao Paulo. I got assigned with a partner in the Mergers and Acquisitions department who specialized in Latin America. And he said to me, listen, you're going to do what I wish I could do. You're young, you've got energy. You're going to move to Sao Paulo because Brazil is like the United States in 1900. Get on your saddle, head out west, in this case head south, and you're going to find gold. And he said, this is what we're going to do. You got to learn how to be a lawyer in New York. I want you to get the New York training, and I want you to develop a reputation for yourself inside the firm, and then we're going to get you to Brazil. So he said, you're going to work for 9 months here until people get to know you, and then I want you to reach out to the partners who have now opened the office in Sao Paulo. And I want you to tell them who you are. Then they'll contact me, and I'll tell them you're great, and it'll be wonderful. And that's what I did. So in August of 2004, I wrote an email. I said, I'm John Kellner. I'm in the M&A group. I'm a first year, and I'm very interested in coming down to the Sao Paulo office. Was hoping we could speak. I didn't hear anything for 3 weeks. So, oh, God, they must have talked around and said, I'm a terrible associate. That's it, the end for me. It's just they get a lot of emails, and it happened on a Sunday. The partner went into his office, read the emails from the last month, saw mine, and said, give me a call. So I called him, and he said he had done research on me, had spoken to other partners. Everybody said, I'm good to go. And he said, so what's your plan? I said, listen, I'd like to do 2 to 2.5 years in New York. I'm now 9 months into it. I'd like to stay for a little bit longer. I'd like to learn M&A, and then I'd like to switch into capital markets because I know that you do a lot of IPOs and bond offerings in Brazil, and I'd like to get some experience doing that, and then I'll come down. He said, that's great. It works for us, June 2006. What else do you need? I said, my Portuguese, I took 101 at Duke about a year and a half ago. I could really use some more class. He said, done. They got me a private tutor. So you just have to ask sometimes, and you can get. So I took private classes at Sherman for about 2 years. And in June 2006, I got on a plane and I moved to Brazil. The plan was for 2 years. As I like to say it, essentially, 2006 was the start of this enormous boom in Brazil. When the book is written on what's happening in Brazil years from now, they're going to look back on the period 2005, 2006, and that's when it started. And I happened to just descend on that country at that time. And don't get me wrong, I didn't speak Portuguese at that time. I had taken Duke with one professor who I had spoken with, and private classes with another teacher, 2 women from Rio. The accent between Rio and Sao Paulo is like the South and New York. I continue to speak with the Rio accent, and everybody just thinks I'm the strangest person in the entire world. So I got down there, and I always tell the story that on my first day, the partner says, John, welcome. We're just so excited to have you in the Sao Paulo office. Listen, I've got some news. We have a meeting here. It's a drafting session for an IPO for a medical insurance company. It's already started. The document is in English right now, and I need you to run it because I can't make it. And I said, okay. He says, the meeting's going to be in English because the document's in English. Makes sense to me. So I walk in, hi, everybody. It's my first day in Brazil. And well, it was 17 Brazilians and me. So what do you think the language of that meeting was? And I was running it. And it was terrible. It was worse than that because in New York, as a junior associate, you get to do due diligence. You've heard it. You don't do the most intense projects, and you don't get to meet high executives. But in Brazil, this was the beginning of the IPO boom. I had across from me the CEO, the CFO, and the head banker that was running the deal. I had never met the junior executive from any company that I had worked with in the United States, and now I was meeting the CEO of a company. I was running the meeting, and I could tell, I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I could tell that he was saying that I didn't know what I was saying, and I didn't know what I was understanding. And I remember I ran out and I called my mom. I said, I got to get out of here. I'm not going to make this happen. This is going to be the end of my career. And she said, you got to stay. You're going to suck it up. And I did. It took about 6 months. It was really tough, but I learned the language because you have no choice. And then I just was doing just the most amazing deals. One statistic that I always talk about was in 2007, there were 700 IPOs in the world. There were 73 out of Brazil alone. And our office at Sherman & Sterling that year in 2007 did 35 of those IPOs. So among 8 lawyers, we were responsible for 5% of the world's IPOs, which I just think is just, I mean, as you can imagine, we worked very hard. It was the best way to learn. If you can imagine, you're a third-year associate and you're just running one IPO after another, it's a great way to learn how to draft. 2008 comes, and Bear Stearns goes under, and June 2008 is essentially the end of my 2-year period. And the partner looks at me in June 2008, he says, aren't you supposed to be on a plane going back? And I said, well, yeah, but I don't want to. It doesn't look so good what's happening in the US. I really would like to stay. As I tell the story in Portuguese, I essentially grabbed onto his legs and said, please don't make me go. And he said, you're doing great. We love having you here. Business is obviously still booming in Brazil, and you're right, things in the US aren't looking so good. Let's keep you around. And what happened, as you all remember, then Lehman collapsed in September. Activity levels dropped considerably throughout the world, and Brazil was no exception. I turned my practice into a different area. I noticed that the capital markets had changed, and I realized that in order to assure that I would still have a place in what I felt was a safer place of the world, in comparison with the United States, as well as a more promising area for my career, I switched my practice from capital markets back to M&A and more to joint ventures. Because what happened was, as the capital markets closed and these fast-growing Brazilian companies couldn't go and sell stock anymore to international investors, and they couldn't sell bonds anymore, they said, we need to do joint ventures. And we're going to do it with the government investment entities. And so they went to GIC from Singapore, and they went to the Canadian Pension Plan, which is called CPP, and they said, team up with us. You're going to pay us a percentage of the profits on your equity, and we're going to have equity as well. And this is a way of fundraising. So instead of raising $400 million by selling stock, they were raising $400 million through joint ventures. And I transformed my practice into that. I learned how to become an M&A and JV lawyer again. All of these deals were done under Delaware and New York law, and so I was doing things that I had never done before. It was very exciting. We were really creating new structures for business in Brazil. And I did that until about July of 2009, when things really started to turn down throughout the world, including in Brazil. And Sherman & Sterling got a call from one of its top clients, which is called Barrick Gold. It's the largest gold company in the world, based in Toronto. And they said that they were going to spin off their African gold operations in Tanzania. And they needed a senior associate who had experience in the emerging markets with flexibility to be able to fly all around the world for the next 6 months and run this deal. Essentially come into Barrick, work as a secondee, work inside of Barrick, and run this deal. And so for various reasons, it fell onto me. I seem to have been the best candidate for this due to my experiences in Brazil. And they offered it to me, and I leapt at the opportunity to essentially come into a company and see what that's like. And so I moved to Toronto in August of 2009. And I worked in Toronto for about 2 months, and then I went to Tanzania. And I worked at the company, and then I flew on these small planes visiting all of the mines, learned the mining business, drafted the prospectus for a London Stock Exchange listing. And I'm just a New York lawyer, but I'm running now a London deal by myself with some people from the company and my London colleagues who were doing the London law matters. But I was drafting the prospectus with the heads of all the mines and working on disclosure and learning about the risks associated and how the Tanzanian government was having presidential elections and they were going to rewrite the mining law and what that was going to do to the investment if any investors bought it. And I stayed in Africa until the end of November, came back to Toronto in December, finished the prospectus, filed it with the authorities in London, and flew back to Brazil in January of 2010. We worked on the transaction until about March. We worked through comments, launched the transaction, and an opportunity opened up for me to switch to Skadden Arps, which I felt, just a small plug for the law firm, which I felt was really the best corporate law firm in America, and represented a tremendous opportunity for me to switch firms at that point in my career and give Skadden a chance in Brazil. And so I switched in March, April of last year, 2010, to Skadden, and I've been working there ever since. That's essentially my story. I really want to open up to questions because I think you all must have a lot of questions, and I want you to ask me whatever it is, and I promise I'll give you an honest answer. Go ahead.
What was your major at UVA? Did you have any kind of training in anything that...
History.
Like, history?
I am really, and I want you to see this, I am the least likely person to have spent 6 years in Brazil. There's nothing about me that said until June of 2006, this guy is going to make a career in Brazil, or in any foreign office, really.
Sometimes I think it's unclear how we should present the LLM part. I mean, some of us are JD-LLM.
Of course.
Also. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that.
Sure. I present it all the time. As I say, your career is your career, and it's how you market yourself to open up opportunities. And I'm a firm believer that the LLM part of my resume opens up opportunities, but it's how you market it. Of course, you take common law, you take the comparative law class, and you learn some basic thing. In the practice, certainly I use it all the time because I'm working with Brazilian lawyers, and I understand how they think because they have a civil law background. I went to Mexico, I took civil law classes, so I understand that a lot of these things translate. But more than that, I simply have always sold myself up as a lawyer who's focused on international transactions, international everything, since the time that I was in law school because I was JD-LLM. I always talk about how I was in Hong Kong, and I was in Hong Kong in 2001 when they announced the Olympics coming to China, and so I always talk about how those experiences really brought me to where I am, and that's what I think you should do as well, if to the extent that you're interested in pursuing a career in the international area.
Please. Could you describe maybe how your experience working in-house versus for a firm was, and kind of why you decided to go, stay long-term with the firm versus
Absolutely.
explore.
That's a great question. I think in-house is very exciting, but it's not where I want to be. I didn't say, but essentially, if I can tell you anything, I'm here to tell you that working in big law firms can be the most exciting place to practice law. I truly believe it, but it's up to you. You got to make it happen. My practice, I'll give you a day in my life. I get in the office and I start the day and I'm working on an IPO. And then I switch and I get some calls related to a farm loan that I'm doing. It's a US bank giving a loan to a Brazilian farm, and I'm running that transaction. And then I'm switching and working on a startup fund. It's going to be investing in startup healthcare companies in Brazil, and our client is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, and they're investing some money into it. And then I'm representing a billionaire who's going to be putting an investment of $10 million into the Barbie acquisition. Now, that has nothing to do with Brazil. It just so happens that he's a Brazilian billionaire, and he got called by this fund and said, "You want to invest with us? This is what we're doing." He said, "Great." As opposed to in-house, which I feel is more, in many cases, managing what I'm doing, I much prefer to be the one who's doing it. And so for that reason, I think that the law firm is a great area. Having said all of that, in-house can be very exciting if you pursue an area of interest to you. So, do you have a follow-up, or is that was complete? Good. Please.
What about for sort of the flip side of what he was asking about the LLM part, for non-LLM, for JD, but with international experience? Is that a barrier at all, or?
Absolutely not. I take it you're just a JD. Yeah. Okay, but you're nothing wrong with that. Yeah, but you're interested in working internationally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you speak a language?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you speak? Spanish. Okay. So what you're going to do is let's say you're going to go to Skadden, okay, and you're going to make sure that you meet the partners who are doing Spanish-speaking work. And you're going to introduce yourself and you say, I'm here, I speak Spanish, would love to help you. The first thing I did at Sherman and Sterling in the Spanish-speaking area was fly to Buenos Aires with a document that could not be sent. It was considered such an important document that it had to be couriered, and the client didn't trust the courier service. They wanted an associate from Sherman and Sterling to get on a plane and fly to Buenos Aires, drop off the document, and fly back. If you can imagine what it was like to be on an overnight flight to Buenos Aires, and I swear I can remember this, every 10 minutes I got up and went into my bag in the carry-on check to make sure that the document was still there. I was so scared that it really it wasn't a bond certificate or anything. It had no value. It just had an original signature. But I was so scared I checked every 10 minutes on that flight to make sure that I didn't lose it. But I showed myself my availability to do whatever it took to get into that area. And I will say that I think that international things have become more competitive since when I started. Just what's happening in the United States, what happened with the financial crisis, the fact that more and more, I don't really think of us as a different generation, but your generation as students realizing that there really are opportunities outside of the United States and doing these types of things. And so you have to be aggressive. And so market yourself. Go to these partners. Tell them who you are. Make sure you meet the associates and then get staffed on the deals.
So along the lines you're talking about marketing yourself, when you first started doing that, was that something that came naturally to you? Or is that something you had to really work at to reach out?
I work very hard all the time. I'm constantly thinking about the next step, and you've always got to. And so it is never easy, and I can assure you, it is never easy to go and contact somebody you don't know. But if you don't do it, I can assure you, you're going to be exactly where you are. You have to do it. And if you don't feel comfortable in calling the person, then you do the passive email, Mr. Whoever, Miss Whoever. It works. Look, I did it, okay? But use my story. In the end, sending the email to Sherman and Sterling didn't get me that meeting until I called. And making that call on my last day in Hong Kong got me my job. So you got to push, so it's not easy. But it works.
Would you say in this market that it's better to speak a language like Spanish that's really common, or a language like Portuguese that they speak in just like a couple places?
I'd say both, if you could. But I think all languages have value. I really don't think that one language is more valuable than another. The opportunities just appear. We get emails all the time. It's a very large law firm, works on many It Matters. Does anyone can help us review this Indonesian document, or can something in Thai? Get it all the time, and that's your opportunity if you speak that language to go for it. I hedged. I was a Spanish speaker. That was what I learned in high school, and then I studied abroad, and then I went and lived in Argentina, and then I studied abroad again. And so that was the direction I was going, and when I noticed that there was a hiccup along the road there, I decided to hedge and move into Portuguese, and I got lucky in certain respects because I didn't know anything about Brazil. I didn't know that I don't think the BRIC terms came around about 2003, I think it was the term BRIC. I was in law school and I was taking Portuguese at the time, but I don't think I had heard that term. So I certainly didn't choose Brazil because I said, oh, it's the first letter in BRIC. Rather, I just said, it's probably the easiest. I suppose it could have been Italian, but for the fact that Portuguese was spoken on the same continent, where I worked, where I lived, I liked the ability to fly back. I couldn't do China for myself because it's too far from my family. I can fly, all flights to Brazil or to the United States are in the evening, and you land in the morning, and it's a 1 hour time difference to Baltimore, which is where my family lives, or New York, or DC, where I have offices. And so it's all very easy for me, and that's why I chose doing it in Latin America. So I don't think that it's what your interest is. But I do think it's helpful to obviously look at the world and say, China's hot, makes a lot of sense to learn Chinese. But there are opportunities everywhere. But
How was Itam, and how did you make the decision to take a semester away from here? Like weighing the classes that are obviously very good here versus the experience of being somewhere else.
I knew that, in my opinion, having international experience is better than not having international experience. And I felt that since I was going to be moving into Spanish-speaking work once I joined the firm, that was the area I wanted to pursue. To learn Spanish legal vocabulary would be very important. And the only way there was two ways. I could have done it on my own, or I could go to Mexico City. And I just thought, what an exciting experience that will be. And of course, you're right, you miss out on excellent classes here. You miss out on your friends and all that type of, you miss out on basketball season, although I went to UVA, so I was not a Duke basketball fan. But you miss out on those, but you got to weigh them. And to me, it was just such a great experience. And how did I make it happen? Working with the international office. They told me that it existed. The woman who was in charge, and still is, of the international program, Anytime is American. I gave her a call and I said, do you remember Duke? They came down and visited. We'd love to do it. And she said, done. So.
How representative do you think it was, your experience, to just contacting a partner and saying, hey, I want to go work in a foreign office? I mean, it works for you at Shearman, but do you think that would work at Skadden, or do you think that would work at other firms?
If there's a need, absolutely. I'll give you an example. In my office, we have two junior associates. One just started last Monday, and one is coming next week. His mother is Brazilian. He's from Texas. He speaks pretty good Portuguese. I wouldn't say he's a native, but he speaks pretty good. He started at the firm. He didn't get recruited as a potential Brazil group guy, but he made it very clear that that's what he wanted to do. And because of the work that we were doing, we just grabbed him and said, do this and this and this and this. The other is a colleague of mine named Lauren. She has, very similar to me, she has no Latin background at all, although she has now a fiance, but at the time a boyfriend who's Brazilian and was working for a very large fund down in Brazil. And she knew that her future with him would be in Brazil. And so she started taking Portuguese classes on her own. And I remember when I had just joined Skadden, she had heard about me, and she ran into me in an elevator, and I had my Duke Law bifold that you all use for your interviews. And to take notes, I brought it with me, and she thought I was an interviewee and I was lost. And she said to me, this is last March, and she says, oh, are you an interviewee? Are you lost? And I said, no, my name is John Kellner, and I'm from the Brazil office. She says, oh, yeah, I heard you were going to be here. And she just grabbed onto me, and she said, I'm in the funds group. And I said, well, I just joined, but I know that we don't do much fund work down in Brazil. But she said, anything that you have, please send it my way. And so she worked the system, and she's moving down next week. So you can work the system.
Does everyone start out in the New York office, or do you recruit people directly to the Brazil office?
We could recruit people directly. You bring up a good question, which is the question that I asked every lawyer with whom I met when I was in Japan and Hong Kong, which is it better to start in New York, or in the United States, let's say, is it better to start in the Chicago office, the LA office, the New York office, the DC office, or is it possible to go straight? Some will say it doesn't make a difference. Some will say, well, London is now large enough, so most of the big firms have large London offices. They'll give you the training that you need. My recommendation, in all honesty, is to go straight to New York. I think that there's the structure in all of the firms. The entire city is created for recent grads from law schools to come and just get integrated into this. I mean, the food delivery at all hours of the night, everything is created for you in 2 years. And the only way you learn really the practice of law is by doing, and in some cases suffering. It really is. It's the only way. And my junior associates, sometimes they hate me because I push them. When I know the answer, I'll still make them find the answer. And the reason is because I say, if I tell you what it is, I swear to you, you'll never learn how to be a lawyer. And so I really feel that New York provides that type of experience. And then go to an overseas office and you learn different skills. So if I had stayed in New York, and all my New York colleagues, they're very specialized. And so they do M&A. And I can promise you they do M&A better than I do M&A. And then there are some who do capital markets. And I promise you they do capital markets better than I do. But in the Brazil office, I do it all. And I can assure you that my M&A colleagues in New York don't know an IPO from a bond offering. And my colleagues in capital markets don't know how to do a Delaware merger. And I know how to do both. And so it's really what you're looking for. That's the type of experience you can have in a smaller overseas office. You can go to London or Paris, and you'll be doing specialized work just like in New York. But if you want to be doing a little bit of everything, a jack of all trades, getting to do a little bit of everything, then you want to go to a smaller office. Answer your question? Good.
For those of us who are also interested in working in Latin America but don't necessarily have an interest in finances, what other areas of growth are you noticing?
Arbitration.
Arbitration?
Is that what you're interested in? Sure. Yeah. Because if you say you're not interested in corporate, then I think maybe litigation. Yeah. And then I would say that the obvious area is arbitration. I'm actually doing a litigation matter myself for an Ecuadorian company. And for those who are JD-LLMs, I would encourage you, another thing while you're here, become very good friends with your LLM colleagues. They are just, not only are they very interesting people when they're students here, and I love them to death, they become extremely good resources to you when you start your practice if you're interested in the international area. I received so much work from my former student colleagues who are now my friends. And every time I fly to Chile or Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, I make sure I see them. They're my friends, but also for business. They become the heads of their law firms. And their clients sometimes have issues that deal with New York law. And so right now I'm doing something for an Ecuadorian LLM who's works for his client is government of Ecuador, who signed a contract under New York law, and the group, they're not paying, and I'm helping them settle it, essentially. But to answer your question more specifically, we at Skadden, for example, are really making a push in arbitration. We have a young partner who speaks French, Spanish, learning Portuguese. I think she speaks Hungarian as well. And she's coming down once a month. And she's developing an arbitration practice. And you can develop it. So right now, we're representing a company that's having a major dispute. They have the TV rights to a certain area of the world for the World Cup. And essentially, the South American Federation of Football just took the contract and ripped it up because they realized once the World Cup came along, it was worth a lot of money. And so they ripped it up, and we're representing them to try to work through that. And that'll turn into arbitration. Right now, it looks like it's like the courts of Florida, but they hired Skadden because they need a New York law firm, sophisticated, to come and help them, and so there's lots of opportunity there. Please.
So I'm an intellectual property kid, and I've heard other people say that big firms like their IP people to be from the country that they're working in. Can you confirm or deny that?
So you mean that big firms want their American lawyers working
Stay in
at
America.
U.S. IP to be U.S. nationals? Okay, so you're saying, what you're saying to me is, I would like to work overseas and do IP, but I don't know if there's opportunities. Okay. It's a limited area, I would say, overseas. And I'm being honest with you. I deal with IP issues all the time, and many times I involve my colleagues from New York who specialize in IP, but I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10 IP issues that come along on my Brazilian transactions involve Brazilian IP matters, which require Brazilian lawyers. And so you find more that you will, as an IP lawyer, do lots of international work, but you'll find it more often you'll be working from New York. You may be working with, let's say Brazil, for example, Brazilian IP lawyers and guiding them on those principles and things like that. But to get an overseas assignment, maybe London, but I'm not really sure. Maybe China, because there's so many IP issues coming along. But I'm not giving you the answer you want to hear. But I think that okay, yeah, it's a very IP is a very specialized area, and unfortunately, as you heard, I do it all. I'm not specialized, but M&A is a broader area than IP. One could do M&A full time in Brazil, but to do IP, it's a little more difficult.
You mentioned that Sherman got you a tutor, I guess, for language. Is that common? I mean, do they invest in like that kind of thing in human capital? I guess.
I mean, I guess that's the theme of my speech, which is, yes, if you make it happen, you can make it. The guy said to me, "You're coming down in June 2006. What do you need?" I could have talked big and said, "Oh, I don't need anything, right? I'll be fine. I took 101 at Duke. I can say oi and I'm great." But I said, you know what? I better protect myself, because if you talk a big talk and you really can't produce, people are going to see real quick. So, and I also said, I want to make the most of the experience, right? I want to be good when I get down there, so I better take more Portuguese. And so I asked, and he said, no problem. And I really feel that's you don't have to follow. I don't expect to see all of you in Brazil. That's not the purpose of my being here. My purpose of being here is to say, this is what I did, and it's applicable to all of your different situations. If you're interested in a pro bono area, for example, and your firm doesn't have a program, so set it up. It's just plugging in the right people and finding that you can do anything you really want to do, because firms are such large institutions with really so many resources. That I think that you can really pursue whatever you're interested in pursuing. And you'll find that once it becomes profitable, if that's what you're interested in, is if you have a profit idea, but no one really thinks it's a good idea, once it becomes profitable, then it's yours, you see? And that just increases your value. And increasing your value is really a very important thing, especially in this time of uncertainty. Right? Unfortunately, many of my colleagues are not practicing law in big law firms, not because they don't want to, but because there's a crisis in the United States, and they were doing much of what everybody else is doing. And so I'm pretty secure, because there are very few Americans who graduated from a top law school, who speak Portuguese and Spanish fluently, have been living in Brazil for 6 years, know so many people, right? Because in Brazil, it's a very small group. We're all on the same street. You see them in the restaurants. There's very few people who can do what I do, and so I've found a way to secure my job, which is very important to me, because obviously I want to remain employed, and I want to remain employed doing what I love doing, which is practicing corporate law in this type of area. Please.
Do you think you want to stay abroad in the long term, or if you ever wanted to permanently move back to the U.S., would you be able to
Sure.
call the partners and be like, "Hi, I'd like to come home now"?
Well, I'm an 8th year now, so I'm hoping that when I'm ready to come home, I'm a partner. Because if I'm still an associate, everything I've told you is completely wrong. Don't listen to me, because I did something really wrong. If in 10 years I'm still an associate, I expect to be a partner. And I can't tell you if I plan on being in Brazil for the next 10, 20 years. Maybe the opportunities that I think are going to happen in Colombia are really going to happen, and you're going to see a Skadden office and other offices in Bogota. And maybe I'm the guy who goes and opens the Bogota office, or maybe it's Santiago, Chile. I do, in a personal level, want to have a family. I expect that will be in Brazil, because I'm there, and I plan on being there for a number of years. but I would love my children to have the high school experience in the United States. And so I want to find a way that I can get back. And I think the way I'll do that is if you've got your own book of business and you've been doing something for a really long time, then you're protected, right? And so as long as your clients will still love you if you're doing it from the United States, then what's the problem, right? And so I hope that in 20 years' time, I'm able to move back to the United States if I choose, and I'm able to say to my clients, I'm on the plane and I'm here tomorrow morning whenever you need me, but I'm going to be doing it from DC, or I'm going to be doing it from New York. And I think with technology and everything, that's going to be possible. I mean, I'm practicing law from Durham today. I'm on my cell phone constantly. Nobody knows that I'm here and not in Brazil, and if they know, they don't care because they get the same level of service. And so technology has really helped us to be able to do it from anywhere.
How would you compare the hours and the quality of life in an international office versus a domestic office?
Great question. In many ways, I have autonomy that I wouldn't have as an eighth-year associate in a New York law firm in New York. Brazil is a country that doesn't prejudice youth. And so it makes no difference that I'm 34 years old and I'm an associate and I'm giving top CEOs from Brazilian companies advice. They don't look at me and they say, where's the partner? You know, I think in the United States, they still do and will continue to do so. So in many ways, I control my schedule because I don't always have someone directly on top of me. I have my partner and he knows everything that I do, but he's not going to all of the meetings because it's a smaller structure. And so associates have more responsibility and more autonomy as a result. So it's a different experience. And that's part of the reason why I love being in a smaller office overseas is because I have the ability to say, you know what, I got an invitation to speak to the students at Duke and I really want to do that. You don't have to worry, partner. I'm going to cover everything as I always do. But on Thursday and Friday of next week, I'm in Durham, North Carolina. I think it would be more difficult if I wanted to definitely know.
How does it impact your chances of making partner to be in a satellite or a smaller office in New York?
If you're in a smaller office in a growing economy, I think nowadays it improves your chances. I think that I will be a partner in a firm in a few years' time in Sao Paulo. I don't know that would be the same case if I was in New York. Part of that is that Brazil and the smaller office plays to a lot of my strengths. And when I identified that, then I knew that I had to stay here. Holding clients' hands, the kind of practice of law that one has to do in Brazil play to my strengths. It's what I'm really good at. Client service in a way that's different in the United States. I always say the Brazilian man hug. It's this, dun, dun, this. You learn that, and then everyone thinks I'm Brazilian, and then it's just great because they look at me and say, you're my U.S. lawyer, but you act like you're Brazilian, and I trust you more. That type of relationship I wouldn't have had with a U.S. client, and so because I have those strengths, it seems to me that this is where I'll make partner. In New York, maybe I would have done it differently, but I think that with the growth of the economy and everything, Brazil offered a really good opportunity for me. Answer your question?
Yes.
I've heard there's some programs for summer associates in foreign offices. How extensive is that? How competitive is it? Is it growing, or nuts and bolts of it?
Sure. This is for the first summer or second summer? Okay. Let's take your first summer first, the more difficult of the summers. The opportunities are there. You won't get paid in many cases, speaking generally, and I'm speaking more about Brazil, but you won't get paid like you would as a second year on the first year lawyer salary base. It'll be more of a learning experience for you and something to put on your resume. But we have done that before, and I've seen other firms do it as well, which I think is a fantastic way of spending your first summer, which is that tricky summer. For your second summer, I've generally seen that those opportunities do exist. Firms do want to send people to their overseas office. I don't know if they're doing as much now as they did pre-crisis, because pre-crisis things, there was a lot more of, whatever the summer associates want to do is what we do. Now things have cut a little bit, but I think the opportunity is still there. It's a great way for the firm to showcase, or basically showcase itself to the summer associates. And so they do send people overseas. But if you don't have a language, it'll be more difficult. So if you know, I don't speak Portuguese, but I really would love to go to Brazil for the summer. A little more difficult. But London office, see it all the time, for example, in the language. Go ahead, Owen.
So I guess I wanted to ask you, and this pertains mostly probably to our 1Ls. How did you decide to be a transactional attorney? You know that your 1L curriculum, there's nothing about M&A or capital markets.
Yep.
When did that coalesce?
Sure. It coalesced in a few different periods, and it's still coalescing, I would say. I didn't know. In fact, I thought that I was going to be an arbitration lawyer. And one part of my story that I didn't tell you all about was before I started Sherman Sterling, I actually was a paralegal, say, or an intern at the ICC, the International Court of Arbitration in Paris. I took the bar in July, and then in August, September, and October, I was living in Paris, and I served as a legal assistant and learned how arbitration cases are administered and worked in the groups, and they have a great program. They do that every 2 or 3 months. They bring in people from all over the world, and it was fantastic. And that was my chance to see arbitration. And at that time, in fact, the Paris office of Sherman called me in and said, we know you're starting in New York, you speak Spanish, we're really making a push for our Latin American arbitration. We'd like to be able to rely on you. We know you're going to M&A, but we'd like to be able to call you up and fly you down to do a deposition or something to the extent you're available. And so I started moving in kind of both directions. I think I chose, before I started the firm, that I was going to do M&A and capital markets, more corporate, when I realized that that was probably a better opportunity for me to guarantee international work. There's so many international transactions. But nowadays, I don't know if that's so. I really think that there are just as many opportunities in the litigation area, particularly if you have language ability. Answer them all? Yeah? All right. Well, make sure everyone has my contact information, please. And all of you should feel free at any time to contact me. We'll give you my email as well as I'll give you my New York number. So you just dial New York and it dials me directly to Brazil. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to support you all because it's important to me that you all do well as a former student at Duke Law. So let me know how I can help you, and look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.